In today's episode, we go over the horrifying details of one of the most terrifying bear attacks ever recorded. A park ranger unknowingly convinces a wildlife photographer to go camping without his firearm. So, when a man-eating grizzly bear breaks into his tent to devour him, he is helpless to defend himself from being eaten alive. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying bear attack on Jay Reeves. Welcome to Final Affliction. Jay Reeves was a wildlife photographer who, in August 1974, headed out to photograph brown bears. His destination was the Eisenbeck National Wildlife Refuge on the northern shore of the Alaskan Peninsula. The salmon run had already peaked, but there were likely to be numerous bears in the locality all the way through to autumn. They were making the most of the abundant fish, fattening up for their winter hibernation in a few months' time. Jay filled his backpack with everything he would need for a few days in the wilderness. He passed by the Eisenbeck Ranger's office and spoke with one of the rangers stationed there, Robert Jones. They spoke about the best places to spot bears. Jay was eager to show Robert his .357 pistol. He wanted to show the ranger that he was knowledgeable and prepared. Robert shook his head and told Jay that a .357 isn't going to stop a bear. What Jay really needed, if he was actively spending time with bears, was a hunting rifle, something with significantly more power. But Jay didn't have a hunting rifle, and if there was no point in taking his pistol with him, then he may as well not bother. So he left the gun behind. Waving farewell to Robert and heeding his warnings of high bear activity in the area, Jay set off on his adventure. His backpack was heavy, full of camping and camera equipment. He also carried with him enough food to last him several days. The landscape was a photographer's dream. Volcanic glaciated peaks stretched downwards into alder forests and bushy tundra that lined the rivers and streams. The fertile waters were a hive of activity and a source of food for many animals, least of all brown bears. Jay walked through Eisenbeck, scanning the surrounds for any wildlife that may be of interest. The narrow trails winded their way through the trees and opened out onto the riverbanks. Along the river, there were signs of bears, bear scat, and salmon remains scattered the shoreline. Jay set up camp a short distance away from the water's edge. He unclipped his rucksack and pulled out his tent. He carefully laid his camera bag down on the ground whilst he set about setting up the tent. It was a small tent, just big enough for him. He arranged his small cooking stove in the porch and collected some firewood. He would rest that night and explore along the river in the morning. It was nice to have a base he could keep everything in. He didn't have to lug his backpack around with him when he was out photographing. He arranged the sticks he had collected into a small pile and lit the fire. It was peaceful and relaxing. The sound of the river bubbling and rushing by, the birds in the trees, the crackling of the small fire. He was amongst the tranquility of nature. Jay sat on a rock whilst a pot of water heated up on his stove. He ate his meal and drank some tea as he looked along the river. There was a gentle breeze which rustled the leaves in the trees. Jay put on an extra layer of clothing as the sun began setting in the sky. He carried his camera down to the river to take some photos of the changing light. The brilliant blue of the sky turned to an inky gray streaked with orange and red from the setting sun. He wandered back up to the campfire and sat there watching the sparks fly and the embers glow. What happened next is one of a few possibilities. No one knows exactly what happened to Jay. Forensic evidence, knowledge of bear behavior, and understanding of how they attack their victims have all contributed to the telling of this story. Whatever truly happened next, there was only one horrific outcome for Jay. As night fell and darkness spread across the Alaskan landscape, Jay turned in for the night. He let the fire die down on its own. The comfort of its red glow slowly faded. Jay unzipped his tent and climbed in. He removed his shoes and left them outside the door. He unrolled his sleeping mat and sleeping bag and climbed in. The sleeping bag provided instant warmth. It was cozy in the tent. Although only a thin layer of canvas protected him from the outside elements, it felt secure. Jay drifted off to sleep. The sounds of nature lulled him into a world of dreams. But outside, something was approaching. There was a hungry predator that frequented the area. The very predator Jay was hoping to photograph the following day. It had stopped in its tracks a short distance away and lifted its muzzle into the air. Its black nose twitched, its eyes glinted in the moonlight. Following a less familiar scent trail through the trees, the bear stepped onto the riverbank. It sniffed the air again. Each time, it readjusted its direction. Then, it spotted Jay's tent. Cautiously, the bear began walking towards the tent. It hesitated at the fire. A few orange embers still glowed. The bear sniffed. Amidst the smell of ash and smoke, the bear smelled something else. Jay had kept his food with him in his tent, biscuits and dehydrated meals. The scent from these was overwhelming for the bear. It investigated further, sniffing at the thin canvas, clawing at the zip. Jay woke suddenly. He had heard a noise. He froze in his sleeping bag, hoping upon hope that he was wrong. But there it was again. A loud sniff just feet from his face. A clacking of jaws. The thud of a heavy footstep. Jay knew instantly it was a bear. He knew that he was in serious danger, and he wished he had kept his pistol with him. Surely even a small gun was better than no gun. The bear tapped the tent with its giant paws. Jay could see the flimsy canvas begin to buckle under the weight of the bear's paw. Then its claw split the canvas, a long tear down one side. Jay didn't know whether to run or freeze. Should he play dead or shout loudly to scare away the animal? But everything happened so quickly, he didn't have time to react. He hadn't seen or heard the bear approach, and he was completely unarmed. Jay lay there, hoping the bear would eventually give up and go elsewhere. But the bear was intent on finding food. It slashed its way through the canvas and came face to face with Jay. In an instant, it leapt on top of him, pinning him to the floor of the tent. Jay tried to fight it off. He thrashed around, desperately trying to punch the bear in its snout. But it was no use. The bear was too strong. Jay likely felt the agonizing pain of the bear's jaws and claws piercing his flesh as it mauled his face, neck, and torso. It wouldn't be long before his cries died down, and he became still. No one knows what his final moments were like. No one knows what his final thoughts were. But Jay was tragically killed that night in a painful and gruesome way. The bear dragged Jay's body from the tent and into the woods to feed at its leisure. It paused at some point to return to the tent and devour the food that Jay had sealed in his backpack. The following morning, a fisherman by the name of Frank Snodgrass discovered Jay's camp. He had been walking along the river, looking for an ideal place to fish, when he noticed Jay's torn tent. The place looked a mess. The tent was ripped and leaning to one side. There was rubbish everywhere. Ash and coals scattered the ground, and there was a pair of shoes placed neatly outside the tent. Frank's heart began beating fast. He knew this didn't look good. He called out, but nobody answered. He immediately called the Fish and Wildlife Service. Officers John Sarvis and John Stimson flew out to the location in a helicopter. They flew down low over the camp. They lowered the chopper to the ground, and John Stimson climbed out. He searched on the ground, whilst John Sarvis scanned the area from the air. He then spotted something. It was a large brown bear in the woods. It was looking up at the helicopter and began running away as the noise of its blades grew louder. He directed his colleague on the ground. John Stimson then found a shocking discovery. Near where the bear had been located, he found evidence of a kill. There was a blood trail and pieces of torn clothing. As he anxiously followed the signs, more and more showed up. It was a devastating find, one that shook him to his core. A few hundred yards into the trees, he came across human remains, a rib cage and Jay's severed head. He stopped, dead in his tracks. He hadn't been prepared for such a gruesome scene. That was all that remained of the wildlife photographer. The officers tracked down the bear in the chopper. When they spotted the animal from the air, John Stimson leaned towards the door. He took aim with his .30-06 hunting rifle. With one shot, the animal fell. The sound reverberated through the trees. The animal was dead. When they conducted an autopsy on the bear, they found human remains inside. They had killed Jay's killer and prevented it from eating any other innocent hikers. This was a tragic end to an ambitious and adventurous photographer, a wildlife lover, and someone who enjoyed the natural environment. But he had made some fatal errors. He had set up camp not only in bear territory, but along a well-used bear route. He had anticipated bears to visit the river and wanted to be in a prime position for capturing these magnificent animals. He was certainly in a prime position, one that cost him his life. He also kept food in his tent, another fatal error, and he carried no defense, no weapon or bear spray. He put himself in a very vulnerable position and paid the ultimate price of meeting his final affliction.